Marcus Chen stared at the holographic display floating above his desk, the amber text burning into his retinas like a brand. The official Galactic Trade Commission order was crystal clear. Locate, appraise, and facilitate the immediate sale of designated alien assets on Station Kepler 442b. The assets in question were listed with clinical precision that made his stomach turn. One adult Zalani female, age approximately 32 Earth Standard years. One juvenile Zalani female, age 7 Earth Standard years. Both classified as bonded laborers following the recent territorial acquisition of the Zalani homeworld by the consortium. Marcus had been a xenobiological asset appraiser for 12 years, long enough to know that territorial acquisition was corporate speak for conquest, and bonded laborers meant slaves. The Galactic Trade Commission tried to dress it up with fancy terminology, but slavery was slavery, no matter what language you wrapped it in. He pushed back from his desk and walked to the reinforced viewport of his small office. Beyond the transparent aluminum, the sprawling refugee camps of Station Kepler 442b stretched as far as the eye could see. Thousands of beings from dozens of species lived in temporary shelters, all displaced by the endless expansion of human corporations across the galaxy. Most would eventually find new homes on colony worlds or integration programs. Some would not be so lucky. The door chime interrupted his brooding. "Come in," he called, not turning from the window. His assistant, a young human woman named Sarah, entered with a tablet in her hands. "The Zalani assets have arrived, Mr. Chen. They're in Processing Bay 7. The buyers are already here, too." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The speed of this transaction felt wrong, rushed in a way that suggested someone powerful wanted it done quickly and quietly. "Who are the buyers?" Sarah consulted her tablet. "Harkonian Mining Syndicate. They're looking for workers for their asteroid operations in the Vega system. The adult female has technical skills that would be valuable for their extraction operations." The Harkonian Mining Syndicate. Marcus knew their reputation. Workers who went to their asteroid facilities rarely lasted more than 2 years before the radiation and harsh conditions killed them. Sending anyone there was essentially a death sentence, let alone a mother and her 7-year-old daughter. "Give me the files on the subjects," Marcus said, finally turning from the window. "I want to review them before the appraisal." Sarah handed him the tablet. The first image that appeared made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. The adult Zalani female had the typical features of her species. Pale blue skin with intricate silver markings that seemed to shift and flow across her face and arms, large dark eyes that held an intelligence he'd rarely seen in any species, and the characteristic elongated cranium that housed their enhanced neural capacity. But it was the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she held herself protectively over the small figure beside her, that hit him like a physical blow. The child was clearly her daughter with the same blue skin and silver markings, though hers were still developing. She clung to her mother's arm, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. According to the file, her name was Lyra. The mother was listed simply as Zara, technical specialist. Marcus scrolled through their history. Zara had been an atmospheric engineer on the Zalani homeworld, responsible for maintaining the complex environmental systems that kept their cities habitable. When human forces had invaded, she'd been captured while trying to evacuate a civilian shelter. Her husband had died in the initial bombardment. She and Lyra had spent the last 6 months in processing centers, bounced from station to station as bureaucrats decided their fate. "Sir?" Sarah's voice broke through his reading. "The Harkonians are getting impatient. They want to complete the transaction today." Marcus closed the file and handed back the tablet. "Tell them I need to complete my full appraisal first. Standard procedure." "It'll take at least 2 hours." Sarah nodded and left. Marcus stood alone in his office for a moment, staring at his reflection in the darkened wall screen. He'd built his career on being thorough, professional, and most importantly, emotionally detached. The Galactic Trade Commission paid him well precisely because he could evaluate alien beings as assets without letting sentiment interfere with business. But as he made his way down the corridor toward processing Bay 7, Marcus found himself remembering his own childhood. His parents had been refugees from the corporate wars on Earth, fleeing to the outer colonies with nothing but the clothes on their backs. He remembered the fear in his mother's eyes, the way she held him close whenever strangers came around. The kindness of the colony administrator who'd given them a chance instead of shipping them off to a labor camp had changed the course of his entire life. The processing bay was a sterile, white room with basic furniture and monitoring equipment. Zara sat on a simple bench with Lyra curled up beside her, the child's head resting against her mother's shoulder. They both wore the standard gray coveralls issued to all refugees, but Marcus could see the proud bearing that marked Zara as someone who had once been important, respected in her community. When he entered, Zara's eyes met his with a directness that was unsettling. Most beings in her situation were broken by the process, reduced to trembling compliance. But Zara studied him with the analytical gaze of an engineer, as if she were trying to understand exactly what kind of machine he was. "I am Marcus Chen," he said, activating his recording device. "I'm here to conduct your appraisal for potential placement." "Placement?" Zara's voice carried the musical quality common to her species, but there was steel underneath. An interesting choice of words for slavery. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. Most refugees had learned not to speak so directly. "I'm required to evaluate your skills and physical condition to determine appropriate work assignments." "And my daughter?" Zara's arm tightened protectively around Lyra. "What appropriate work assignment exists for a 7-year-old child?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus knew the answer, had read it in the Harkonian files. Lyra would work in the asteroid processing centers, sorting minerals in the low radiation areas until she was old enough for heavier labor, if she lived that long. "That will be determined based on her aptitude tests," Marcus said, hating how hollow the words sounded. For the next hour, Marcus went through the standard procedures. He tested Zara's technical knowledge and found it impressive even by human standards. Her understanding of atmospheric systems was intuitive and sophisticated. She could design environmental controls that would keep a space station running for decades. On any civilized world, she would be a valued professional. Lyra proved to be remarkably intelligent as well. Despite her fear, she answered Marcus's questions with a clarity that spoke to the excellent education she'd received before the war. She was already reading at an advanced level and showed a natural aptitude for mathematics that reminded Marcus of some of the best human engineers he'd known. As the evaluation continued, Marcus found himself noticing small details that spoke to the bond between mother and daughter. The way Zara would gently stroke Lyra's hair when the child became frightened. How Lyra would lean against her mother whenever a question became too overwhelming. The quiet words of encouragement in their musical language that seemed to give both of them strength. "Your evaluation is complete," Marcus announced, deactivating his recording device. "I'll need some time to prepare my report." Zara nodded, but her eyes never left his face. "The buyers who are waiting for us," she said quietly. "What kind of work do they do?" Marcus hesitated. He wasn't supposed to discuss buyers with the assets, but something in Zara's voice made him want to be honest. "Mining operations, asteroid extraction in the Vega system." The color drained from Zara's already pale features. Even she knew what that meant. "And children can work in the mines?" "Not in the mines directly," Marcus said, which was technically true. They would work in the processing centers, which was only marginally less dangerous. Zara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. I had hoped that humans might be different, that a species capable of such technological achievements might have evolved beyond this kind of cruelty. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd spent years telling himself that he was just doing his job, that the system wasn't his responsibility. But looking at this mother and daughter, seeing the intelligence and dignity that the system was about to destroy, he couldn't maintain that comfortable distance anymore. "I need to finalize my report," he said abruptly, standing to leave. As he reached the door, Lyra spoke for the first time in over an hour. "Will we be together?" she asked in carefully practiced standard. "Mama and me?" Marcus turned back to see both mother and daughter looking at him with identical expressions of desperate hope. He wanted to lie to give them some comfort, but the words wouldn't come. "I don't know," he said finally, and fled from the room. Back in his office, Marcus stared at the blank appraisal form on his screen. All he had to do was fill in the standard information, submit the report, and collect his fee. The Harkonians would take custody of Zara and Lyra, and they would disappear into the vast network of corporate labor camps that stretched across human space. He thought about his comfortable apartment on the upper levels of the station, his savings account that grew larger with each successful appraisal, the respect he'd earned in his profession. All of it built on moments like this, on reducing sentient beings to commodity assessments. Marcus pulled up the communication channel to the Harkonian representative. The alien appeared on his screen, its reptilian features arranged in what passed for a smile among its species. "Appraiser Chen," the Harkonian hissed, "my clients are eager to complete this transaction. What is your assessment of the assets?" Marcus looked at the words he'd typed in the report. Adult female, grade A, technical specialist, excellent health, suitable for extended operations. Juvenile female, grade B educational potential, suitable for light processing work. His finger hovered over the submit button. Once he pressed it, there would be no going back. Zara and Lyra would become property of the Harkonian mining syndicate, just two more names in the endless stream of beings fed into the corporate machine. Instead, Marcus deleted the report. "I'm afraid there's been a complication," he told the surprised Harkonian. "Both subjects have tested positive for Zalani fever, highly contagious. They'll need to be quarantined for at least 6 months before they can be cleared for transport." It was a complete lie. Zalani fever had been eradicated decades ago, but the Harkonians wouldn't know that, and they certainly wouldn't want to risk exposure to their other workers. The alien's expression shifted to one of disgust. "Unacceptable. We need healthy workers immediately. Find us suitable replacements from your other stock." "Of course," Marcus said smoothly. "I'll have alternative options for you within the week." After ending the communication, Marcus sat back in his chair and wondered what the hell he'd just done. He'd bought Zara and Lyra some time, but eventually someone would discover his deception. When they did, his career would be over, and he'd likely face criminal charges for interfering with a legal commercial transaction. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was Lyra's small hand clutching her mother's arm, and the quiet dignity with which Zara had faced what she thought was inevitable doom. Some things, Marcus realized, were more important than careers. Now he just had to figure out what to do next. Marcus spent the next 3 days researching every legal loophole he could find. The Galactic Trade Commission's regulations were extensive, but they were also full of contradictions and bureaucratic gaps that a determined person could exploit. The trick was doing it in a way that wouldn't immediately trigger an investigation. On the 4th day, he found his answer in an obscure subsection of the Colonial Development Act. Any being with specialized technical skills could petition for emergency placement in critical infrastructure projects, provided they had a sponsor willing to guarantee their performance and behavior. The process typically took months and required extensive documentation, but Marcus had spent years learning how to navigate the Commission's bureaucracy. He began forging the necessary documents that night. The hardest part was creating a legitimate-seeming infrastructure project that would require Zara's specific skills. Marcus spent hours crafting a proposal for atmospheric system upgrades on a fictional mining colony in the Centauri system. He backdated contracts, created false environmental assessments, and even generated fake communications with colonial administrators. By the time he was finished, the paper trail looked convincing enough to pass a casual inspection. The identity documents were trickier. Marcus needed to create new records for both Zara and Lyra that would show them as voluntary colonists rather than captured assets. This required accessing secure databases that he technically had no authorization to modify. But 12 years as an appraiser had given him security clearances that most people never questioned. Working late into the night, Marcus carefully altered their status classifications. Zara became a contracted atmospheric engineer voluntarily relocating for work. Lyra became her dependent daughter, eligible for colonial education programs. He created employment histories, educational records, even medical files that supported their new identities. The most dangerous part was the financial trail. Marcus had to transfer enough credits into accounts linked to their new identities to make their story believable. He used his own savings, moving the money through a series of intermediary accounts to obscure its origin. By the time he was finished, he'd spent nearly half of everything he'd saved over the past 5 years. While Marcus worked on the legal preparations, he found himself visiting Zara and Lyra more frequently than his job required. Officially, he was monitoring their quarantine status and conducting additional evaluations. In reality, he was trying to prepare them for what came next, without revealing his plan. During one visit, he brought a standard education tablet loaded with colonial development information. "I thought Lyra might benefit from some advanced learning materials," he told Zara. "Many of the colony worlds have excellent educational opportunities for children with her aptitude." Zara studied him carefully as Lyra began exploring the tablet's contents. "You speak of colony worlds as if they were a possibility for us." "The galaxy is a large place," Marcus said carefully. "There are many different paths a person's life can take." "Even for people like us?" Zara's question was direct, but not hostile. "People who have been classified as property?" Marcus met her eyes. "Especially for people like you. Engineers with your skills are needed everywhere. The Commission recognizes that talented individuals can contribute more as free citizens than as forced laborers." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. The Commission did occasionally grant freedom to individuals with exceptional abilities, though they usually required years of bureaucratic appeals and substantial bribes to the right officials. Over the following days, Marcus began teaching Zara about human colonial procedures and legal systems. He explained how infrastructure contracts worked, what kinds of documentation she would need to establish herself as a legitimate resident of a colony world, and how to navigate the complex web of regulations that governed life in human space. Lyra proved to be an eager student as well. She absorbed information about colonial education systems with the quick intelligence that her species was known for. Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying these teaching sessions, remembering why he'd originally been drawn to xenobiology. Before the war and the refugee crisis, his job had been about understanding and helping alien species integrate into galactic civilization. These conversations with Zara and Lyra reminded him of what that work could be at its best. On the 7th day, Marcus received a priority communication from the Galactic Trade Commission's regional office. A supervisor named Director Hutchinson appeared on his screen, her expression stern and professional. "Appraiser Chen," she said without preamble, "I've received some unusual reports about your handling of the Zalani assets designated for the Harkonian Mining Syndicate. The buyers are claiming that you've delayed their transaction with unsubstantiated health concerns. Marcus kept his expression neutral. The subjects tested positive for Zalani fever during standard screening. Protocol requires a full quarantine period before they can be cleared for transport. Director Hutchinson consulted her files. According to our medical database, Zalani fever was declared extinct over 30 years ago. The last confirmed case was in 2387. Which is precisely why it's so dangerous, Marcus replied smoothly. Any re-emergence of the disease would represent a significant public health threat. I felt it was essential to err on the side of caution. The director's eyes narrowed. I'm ordering an immediate independent medical examination. Dr. Reeves from the station's medical facility will conduct a full biological scan of both subjects within the next 6 hours. If no traces of Zalani fever are found, you will release them to the Harkonians immediately. Marcus felt his heart sink, but he maintained his professional demeanor. Of course, Director. I'll coordinate with Dr. Reeves immediately. After the communication ended, Marcus sat in his office, trying not to panic. Dr. Reeves was thorough and honest, two qualities that made him an excellent doctor, but a terrible ally for Marcus's deception. The medical scan would immediately reveal that neither Zara nor Lyra showed any signs of disease. Once that happened, the Harkonians would take custody of them within hours. Marcus had one chance to make his plan work, and it meant accelerating his timeline dramatically. The forged documents were ready, but he'd planned to gradually introduce them into the system over several weeks to avoid suspicion. Now he would have to submit everything at once and hope that the bureaucracy moved slowly enough to give them a head start. He activated his secure terminal and began uploading the false documentation. Colonial Development Contract for Atmospheric Systems Specialist on Kepler 438c. Employment Authorization for Zara Kethrin, Atmospheric Engineer. Dependent Status Approval for Lyra Kethrin, Minor Child. Emergency Transportation Requisition for Critical Infrastructure Personnel. Each document required multiple authorization codes and digital signatures. Marcus forged them all, using access credentials he'd accumulated over years of legitimate work. The process took 3 hours, but by the end, Zara and Lyra officially existed as free citizens with authorized employment waiting for them on a distant colony world. The last step was the most dangerous. Marcus had to physically move them off the station before Dr. Reeves completed his medical examination. The passenger transport to Kepler 438c departed in 4 hours. If he could get them aboard, they would be in hyperspace before anyone discovered the deception. Marcus made his way to Processing Bay 7, his heart pounding with each step. When he entered, he found Zara reading to Lyra from one of the educational tablets. The scene was so peaceful, so normal, that it made what he was about to do feel both more urgent and more necessary. I need you both to come with me, he said without preamble. Right now. Don't ask questions, just gather your belongings and follow me. Zara stood immediately, her engineer's instincts recognizing the tone of someone dealing with an emergency. What has happened? I'll explain on the way, Marcus said, helping Lyra collect her few possessions. But we need to move quickly. They made their way through the station's corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares where they might be spotted by security cameras or patrol officers. Marcus used service passages and maintenance routes he'd learned during his years on the station, leading them deeper into the industrial section where the cargo and passenger docks were located. As they walked, Marcus explained what he'd done. I've created new identities for you as voluntary colonists. You have employment authorization on Kepler 438c, a world that needs atmospheric engineers. Lyra will be enrolled in the colonial education system. You'll be free citizens, not indentured workers. Zara stopped walking so abruptly that Lyra bumped into her. You have done this for us? But why? What do you gain from helping slaves escape? Marcus turned to face her, seeing his own reflection in her large, dark eyes. "I gained the ability to look at myself in the mirror," he said simply. "I've spent 12 years reducing people to commodity assessments. I won't do it anymore." They reached the passenger terminal just as the boarding announcement for the Kepler 438C transport began. Marcus presented their forged documentation to the departure clerk, a bored-looking human who barely glanced at the authorization codes before scanning their identity chips. "Atmospheric engineer and dependent," the clerk confirmed. "Emergency colonial placement. You're cutting it close. This transport doesn't run again for 6 weeks." "Critical infrastructure projects can't wait," Marcus said, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. The clerk handed them their boarding passes. "Deck 7, compartments 43 and 44. Journey time is 18 days. Welcome to the Colonial Service." As they made their way toward the boarding ramp, Lyra tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Are you coming with us?" she asked in her careful standard. Marcus knelt down to her level. "No, little one, I have to stay here. But your mother will take good care of you, and you'll have a wonderful life on your new world." "But what will happen to you?" Lyra's eyes were wide with concern. "Will you get in trouble for helping us?" Marcus glanced at Zara, who was watching their exchange with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I might," he admitted. "But sometimes doing the right thing is more important than staying out of trouble." Zara knelt beside her daughter and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Among my people," she said softly, "there is a concept called Cathara, the bond between souls who choose to protect each other even when it costs them everything. You have given us Cathara, Marcus Chen. I will not forget." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Just take care of each other. Build a good life on Kepler 438C. That's all the thanks I need." He watched them board the transport, Zara's hand protectively on Lyra's shoulder as they disappeared into the ship's passenger section. The boarding ramp retracted, and the massive vessel began its departure sequence. Marcus made his way to an observation deck and watched the transport accelerate away from the station. In a few minutes, it would jump to hyperspace, carrying Zara and Lyra toward a new life as free citizens of a distant colony. By the time Dr. Reeves discovered that they were healthy, they would be days away from the nearest communication relay. His personal communicator buzzed with an incoming priority message. Director Hutchinson's face appeared on the small screen, her expression furious. "Chen, where are the Zalani assets? Dr. Reeves reports that their quarantine bay is empty." Marcus took a deep breath. "I'm afraid there's been another complication, Director. The subjects have been transferred to a high-security medical facility due to concerns about disease transmission. I'm still waiting for clearance to visit them myself." It was another lie, one that would buy him perhaps a few more hours before the truth came out. But those hours might be enough for the transport to reach its first jump point, making pursuit nearly impossible. "I want a full report on my desk within the hour," Hutchinson snapped. "And Chen, if I discover that you've been anything less than completely truthful about this situation, your career with the Commission is finished." After the communication ended, Marcus leaned against the observation deck's railing and watched the stars. His career probably was finished, regardless of what Hutchinson discovered. But as he thought about Lyra's shy smile and Zara's quiet dignity, he found that he didn't care as much as he'd expected. For the first time in 12 years, Marcus Chen felt like he'd done something that actually mattered. The investigation began 6 hours after the transport, carrying Zara and Lyra jumped to hyperspace. Marcus sat in a sterile interrogation room, facing Director Hutchinson and 2 internal affairs officers, whose expressions suggested they'd already decided he was guilty of something. "Let's review the timeline," Director Hutchinson said, consulting her tablet. "You receive an assignment to appraise 2 Zalani refugees for sale to the Harkonian mining syndicate. You delay the transaction claiming they have an extinct disease. When ordered to submit them for medical examination, they mysteriously disappear from their quarantine facility. Marcus maintained his calm demeanor. As I explained in my report, medical personnel determined that the subjects required transfer to a specialized facility. I'm still waiting for clearance to visit them. One of the internal affairs officers, a thin man with cold eyes, leaned forward. Which facility, Appraiser Chen? We've contacted every medical installation on this station and in the surrounding system. None of them have any record of Zalani patients. Marcus had known this moment would come. His fabricated story was falling apart under scrutiny, just as he'd expected it would. The only question now was how much damage he could minimize. Perhaps there was a miscommunication in the transfer paperwork, he said. Medical emergencies can sometimes create confusion in the documentation. Director Hutchinson's expression grew even more stern. Mr. Chen, we have security footage of you escorting the Zalani subjects through service corridors toward the passenger terminal yesterday afternoon. We also have records showing that 2 individuals matching their description boarded a transport to Kepler 438C using colonial development authorizations that were processed using your access codes. Marcus felt a strange sense of relief. The pretense was over. He could stop lying and face whatever consequences came next. Then you already know what happened, he said quietly. I gave them a chance at freedom instead of slavery. I'm not sorry for that. The room fell silent for a moment. Director Hutchinson studied Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. Do you understand what you've done? You've stolen corporate property worth hundreds of thousands of credits. You've violated your oath as a commission appraiser. You've interfered with legal commercial transactions. I understand perfectly, Marcus replied. I also understand that what we call legal doesn't make it right. Those weren't property. They were a mother and daughter who deserve better than a death sentence in the asteroid mines. The thin internal affairs officer made a note on his tablet. Confession of criminal activity. That simplifies our investigation considerably. Over the next several hours, Marcus answered their questions with complete honesty. He explained how he'd forged the documents, altered the database records, and used his savings to fund their escape. He provided details about every aspect of his deception, holding nothing back. What he didn't tell them was that the transport carrying Zara and Lyra had already made its first hyperspace jump, putting them in a different star system entirely. Even if the Commission wanted to pursue them, it would take weeks to coordinate with colonial authorities, and by then they would be lost among the millions of refugees and immigrants scattered across human space. The formal charges came 3 days later. Marcus was accused of theft, fraud, computer tampering, and violation of his commission oath. The penalties could include decades in prison and financial ruin. But as he sat in his cell awaiting trial, Marcus found himself thinking about Lyra's questions about whether she and her mother would stay together, and he knew he'd made the right choice. 6 weeks later, during his trial, something unexpected happened. Marcus had resigned himself to conviction and imprisonment, but on the 3rd day of proceedings, a new voice spoke from the gallery. Your Honor, I request permission to address the court. Marcus turned in surprise to see a familiar figure rising from the spectator seats. It was Ambassador Elena Vasquez, the human representative to the Galactic Council. Marcus had seen her on news broadcasts, but had never imagined she would involve herself in a case like his. The judge, clearly as surprised as everyone else, granted permission. Ambassador Vasquez approached the witness stand with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to addressing interstellar assemblies. Your Honor, I've been following this case with great interest because it touches on issues that go far beyond the actions of one individual. For months, I've been receiving reports from across human space about the treatment of refugees from conquered worlds. What Appraiser Chen did was technically illegal under current regulations, but it represents the kind of moral courage that our species should be proud of, not punishing. She turned to address the courtroom directly. The Zalani people were our allies before corporate interests decided their world was more valuable than their freedom. We're judging Mr. Chen for refusing to sell a child into slavery, and that should shame us all. The prosecutor objected, but Ambassador Vasquez continued. I'm here to announce that the Colonial Development Authority has unanimously voted to grant blanket amnesty to any refugees who can demonstrate productive integration into colonial society. Furthermore, any commission employee who aids in this process will be protected under the Whistleblower Protection Acts. Marcus felt his heart race. The ambassador was essentially retroactively legalizing what he'd done, but more importantly, she was extending protection to thousands of other refugees who might still be saved. The trial continued for 2 more days, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Public opinion had shifted dramatically after Ambassador Vasquez's statement, and several other high-ranking officials came forward to support Marcus's actions. The prosecutor, reading the political winds, quietly reduced the charges to minor administrative violations. Marcus was sentenced to time served and a formal reprimand. He lost his job with the Galactic Trade Commission, but the Colonial Development Authority immediately offered him a position as Refugee Integration Specialist. Instead of appraising people as property, he would help them build new lives as free citizens. 3 months after his trial ended, Marcus received his first communication from Kepler 438c. The message was audio only, but he recognized Zara's musical voice immediately. "Marcus," she said, and he could hear the smile in her words. "I wanted you to know that we are well. The colony administrator welcomed us warmly, and my work on the atmospheric systems has already begun. Lyra has started school and is making friends with children from a dozen different species. She asks about you often." There was a pause, and then Lyra's voice came through the speakers. "Hello, Marcus. I learned to read Terran Standard perfectly. Mama says you gave us the most important gift anyone can give, freedom. I'm going to study engineering like her so I can help other people too." Zara's voice returned. "The colony is growing, and we need more skilled workers. Many of them are refugees like us who deserve the chance you gave us. If you ever decide that your work there is finished, there would be a place for you here. A real place, as part of our family." Marcus played the message 3 times, each repetition strengthening his resolve. His work with the Colonial Development Authority was important, but it was also limited. For every refugee he helped integrate, dozens more disappeared into the corporate labor system. On Kepler 438c, he could do something more meaningful. Help build a community where no one would ever again be reduced to a commodity assessment. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of a passenger transport, watching Kepler 438c grow larger in the viewport. The planet was beautiful in a stark way, with silver mountains rising above blue-green valleys where human engineering had created breathable atmosphere. It was a world where different species worked together to build something new, something better than what they'd left behind. As the transport entered the planet's atmosphere, Marcus thought about the chain of events that had brought him here. A routine appraisal assignment that had challenged everything he believed about his work and himself. A moment of moral clarity that had cost him his career but given him something far more valuable. The knowledge that he'd chosen compassion over compliance, human decency over corporate profit. The spaceport was smaller than the massive installations Marcus was used to, but it bustled with activity. Humans worked alongside Zalani, Centaurians, and a dozen other species, all of them building a society based on cooperation rather than exploitation. He spotted them before he'd even cleared customs. Zara stood near the arrival gate, her silver markings bright against her blue skin, wearing the practical clothing of a working engineer. Beside her, Lyra had grown taller in the months since he'd seen her, but she still had the same bright intelligence in her dark eyes. When Lyra saw him, she broke away from her mother and ran toward him with the uninhibited joy of a child. Marcus knelt down and caught her in a hug that felt like coming home. "You came," she said in perfect standard, her words tumbling over each other with excitement. "Mama said you might not be ready to leave your important work, but I knew you would come. I've been teaching the other children about Earth customs. And we want to show you the school, and the atmospheric plant where Mama works, and everything." Marcus stood up, still holding Lyra's hand, and faced Zara. She approached more slowly, her expression showing a mixture of joy and something deeper, more complex. "Welcome to Kepler 438c, she said formally, but her eyes were warm. "Welcome to your new home." As they walked through the spaceport together, Lyra chattering about her friends and her classes, Marcus realized that this was what he'd been searching for his entire career without knowing it. Not a job or a profession, but a purpose. Not clients or assets, but family. The colony stretched out before them under the light of an alien sun, filled with beings who had found freedom because someone had been willing to risk everything to give them a chance. It was beautiful, and it was theirs. And Marcus Chen had never been happier to leave his old life behind. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table in Zara's modest home, sharing a meal with two other refugee families who had become close friends, Lyra asked a question that made Marcus smile. "Marcus," she said seriously, "when I grow up and become an engineer like Mama, will you teach me how to help people the way you helped us?" Marcus looked around the table at the faces watching him, beings from 3 different worlds who had found safety and purpose in this small corner of the galaxy. "I think," he said, "we can teach each other." Outside the window, the lights of the growing colony twinkled like stars, each one representing a life that had been given a chance to flourish. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy. But it was honest work done by good people who believed that every sentient being deserved the fundamental right to control their own destiny. For Marcus Chen, former asset appraiser turned refugee advocate, it was more than enough. It was everything.